Hi everyone. Hi Tennille.
Hi, Destinee. Hi, Hollis.
Hi Anthony.
Kayla. I guess we could wait a little more so more people
Yeah,
can
just
join.
a few. Yeah. Oh, that was
Hi,
my dog.
Destinee.
So Tennille, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Oh, Hannah, thank you for saying bless you to Sadie. I'm doing fine. Really excited for this talk.
Yes.
Okay. So we've got a good amount of people. I guess it would be appropriate to do quick introductions and things like that. So Tennille, do you mind introducing yourself, talking a bit about you?
My name is Tennille Mack. I'm a rising senior. My studies are art history and international studies, and I'm currently in Harlem, and I'm a rising senior.
Yes. My name's Destinee Filmore. Hi, everyone. I'm also an art history student at Spelman College going into my 4th year. And I'm in Tampa, Florida, which is my hometown.
So I think that we should get started by introducing our paths into the art history program at Spelman and sort of what inspired us to become more involved in actually pursuing the career.
I agree. And also taking it a step further, maybe also talking about how we got to Spelman in general. So would you like to begin?
Yes. Okay. So interestingly enough for me, my journey to Spelman started when I met an alum and just going through the application process. I didn't think anything of attending Spelman at all. I was just like applying to schools, making sure I had everything crossed off my list. And one of the most important things to me was the opportunity to travel, get exposure, and receive the proper financial backing. And after struggling some time to trying to secure some finances, definitely staying down in the journey, I was able to um, successfully get a scholarship. And something that a Spelman alum told me was, you don't choose Spelman, Spelman chooses you. And that's definitely been something that has kept me sane during my journey at Spelman in the matriculation process. So, how about you?
Well, my journey to Spelman was also not linear. So I knew that I wanted to apply. I visited actually on my birthday in the fall of our senior year in 2016. And it was wonderful. It was really exciting. And I loved it. I loved the campus. I loved everything about Spelman as an idea, and knew that I was going to apply. And so once I did, it was just a waiting game. And once I got the notification back from Spelman, I put it on pause. I will admit to that. I put it on pause for financial reasons. I knew that I'm a first generation student, and I knew that having a scholarship was going to be essential to me going anywhere for school. And so I had to wait and decided to apply to Florida State University, and got a scholarship there, and was this close to going to Florida State University, but there was a pile of mail on my dining room table that I had been ignoring, and one of the letters on that pile that I'd been ignoring for like a week or so was from Spelman, and it was a notification that I'd been chosen as a Bonner Scholar, and that moment completely changed my life. And of course, immediately I knew I was going to Spelman, and since then I've been here, and I've been having a wonderful time here. But like you, my journey to coming to art history was also not linear. I came in as an international studies major, and knew that I really loved art, and I loved the arts, and thought cultural diplomacy was my way to go. But because of a really happy accident, I ended up in the art history program. And I tell this story all the time, and I know you know it, but I'll say it again for everyone else. A really great friend of mine was in the Intro to Curatorial Studies class, and that class takes place in the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art. I was walking in there working on my museum audio narrative project for African diaspora in the world. It's a required course at Spelman for every first-year student. And I heard them talking about ideas for basically for an interactive space within the museum. And I had just gotten back from home and the Dali Museum, and I had an idea, and so I texted this friend of mine, and she read my response to the class, and Dr. Andrea Brownlee and Miss Ann Collins Smith were all there, and I told her to tell me to come there to the circle, and so I did, and I've been in the circle ever since. I sat there with them throughout the whole class, and just had this amazing and engaging conversation that I hadn't realized that I was craving. And so we sat and we talked, and then somehow I ended up getting invited to go to the James A. Porter Colloquium later on that spring, and that was such a phenomenal experience as well. So that's how I came to curatorial studies, and then later on, eventually to the art history program. What about you?
And I think for me, very similar in meeting Dr. Barnwell Brownlee and having that interaction was the opening of this was fall 2017, and there was an opening for the show at the museum, and I remember taking a class with African American art with Dr. Shinzira, and we had the opportunity to speak with Zoe Whitley, and through there we furthered our connection, and I mentioned to her how my interest in art stemmed from just kind of growing up in Harlem and being able to navigate the cultural community, as well as understanding how art has always played an essential part in society. And for me, once I was at Spelman, despite not really being sure if I wanted to continue to practice art, I knew that I needed a better foundation within understanding how it's all connected. So for me, that meant art history. And I've told this story many times as well. Senior year, I participated in a portfolio prep program through Cooper Union, and one of the studio visits was with Jack Whitten. And in that studio visit, I just learned so much about his journey as an artist and as an African American artist in the South, and how that inspired much of his work, and how being a Black artist inherently has so many different obstacles that aren't always acknowledged, and sometimes your work isn't even acknowledged. So after speaking to Dr. Barnwell Brownlee and Miss Ann Collins Smith at the museum, also Miss Makiba Dixon Hill, they've all been essential. I was also invited to the James Porter Colloquium in DC, and here we are today, at International Studies and Art History double major.
That is so exciting. So let's think, and I would really love for you to talk more about, I guess, the transition from being a part of the curatorial studies program as it existed before to the AUC Art Collective, because they are different, and the structure itself is also different. So can you talk a bit more about how that transition was for you? Because I know how it was for me, but I really would like to hear your experience with that.
Being that, so during my freshman year, I didn't really take any core like major related classes. I just took like more of my core curriculum classes. So sophomore year was when I started to get more into like the nitty gritty of things. But as far as the curatorial studies program, I think that being that I didn't take all of the courses at the same time. So my journey was definitely different in that I was able to take other courses in art history prior to my completion of the curatorial studies program. And the fall of junior year, I was abroad in London at Goldsmiths University.
Yes.
So
and I miss you every day.
So the introduction of the art collective was definitely something that I got to see from an outside standpoint and seeing how it all came together. So I was looking forward to finally being a part of everything once I returned during the spring of 2020. And it's definitely been more cohesive and had more structure in guiding me to a future within the art history, as well as just helping me understand what I would like to see and get out of the program itself.
Absolutely.
And like for you, do you remember, was it, because for me, I don't really feel like it was a immediate split between the two because they coincide so much. So how was that transition for you?
I think that it was quite smooth, actually. So, you know, that we were like so much a part of the curatorial studies program, and in a way, it felt like it was already just a part of like my academic experience at Spelman because of the courses and because of all of the events like outside, so exhibition openings, also travel opportunities, but also the internship component of the program. It felt like it was something already embedded in the way that I was going through Spelman. And so when the transition happened, it just sort of solidified that officially to Spelman, so that in a way I didn't have to continue to, I guess, rationalize why I was spending so much time doing these things, because now it's a part of my graduation requirements, you know, to go to events that the AUC Art Collective puts on and to engage with Atlanta's art community and also with the art community in the AUC. And I think that's also something that's been not a profound change, because we did have students from Morehouse College and I think one or
Clark
two students
well.
from Clark Atlanta University, that were engaged in the curatorial studies program. And now I just see that continuing. And so we're in classes with them all the time. And in a way, it's been really lovely to be a part of this first graduating cohort under the new like rules and regulations, I guess, of the art history major, because we're all just kind of together in this. I have classes with the same 10 people, and it's great. And we can really build community in that way and support one another. It's also been really wonderful to see everyone's growth, and my own included in that. So that's really been wonderful. So it wasn't a really stark transition. It was just sort of doing what we were doing before, but then taking it to another level, and that being embedded in like every day. So.
And I think to your point of rationalizing, why am I doing this? Is this the right move for me? That's something I've struggled with, because traditionally there's a lot of questions surrounding the security of a job and your livelihood of pursuing a career within the arts. And I definitely think that you can't continue to question things that are constantly being thrown at you and are coming so naturally. So that's what helped me understand that this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and I should continue to engage in different conversations, as well as speak to the opportunities that I want to seek. So like what in regards to internships, shadowing, or gallery visiting, that's also been something that's helped me solidify my understanding within how the art history culture itself works, as well as who is it that I would like to be and what kind of scholar and professional I would like to be within the art industry itself.
Absolutely. And I think all the people that we've gotten to meet and all the places that we get to go, um, both locally in Atlanta and also nationally, it's really shown me that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of people that are sustaining themselves doing work that is really meaningful to them, but also to this larger cause and initiative.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing that has made me, it's reassured me in a way. I don't know, I guess I just have this blind faith that it's going to work out anyway, but
Me
definitely
too.
having the validation or the confirmation rather of seeing people being successful in this field and really in any arts professional position, I guess, or within the field of art of the arts, it's been really great. Um,
Yeah.
Something, however, that you mentioned earlier, and that I want you to talk more about, is the impacts of this pandemic on our plans. So you just came back from London this spring. We were having a great time, and then we had to leave. So
Yeah.
talk more about that and maybe how that sort of affected
Mm-hmm.
your thoughts or your plans, excuse me, and stuff like that. I'd really like to hear more about that.
So while I was abroad, I had a great time in London and just exploring. But there was definitely a part of me that missed being at Spelman and with my friends and just the energy
Mm-hmm.
that is so special and specific to Spelman. So I was excited to come back in the spring, had so many things planned, even planned to go back abroad to Brazil this summer and participate in different internship programs and exposure opportunities. But COVID had another thing planned for me. So, along with just the changes that have come with the pandemic, it's also helped me reassess the things that I think I want and reaffirm them with the things I need. So, within applying to different internships, I know that it was very difficult because many museum programs had been shut down. Like I know the Met, as well as just numerous amounts of programs were completely shut down, which was very understandable. And I continued to apply, and I was able to get in contact with an organization called the Art Institute, and they also offer an internship program. So thankfully, I'm also a participant in that, as well as the AUC Art Collective internship, which has definitely been great because not only do we engage in various conversations with different art professionals, but also I'm working with Dr. LaRon Brooks, who is at the Getty Research Institute. And while I'm focusing on different things there, my research with Dr. Brooks at the Getty has been centered in understanding the complexity within the Black identity in art. And for me, it's this idea of persona versus power. And how does the Black persona or this persona of a leader sometimes shift into this form of power that dismisses the true intention of what is trying to be exposed? So I think despite the changes that have come with the pandemic, I'm definitely grateful that I'm still alive. I'm grateful that I'm safe and I'm with my family. And even though there's the notion that things will never be the same, I think it's important that we shift and we um, sort of reassess why the changes needed to occur
Yeah.
and make sure that they continue to change in a way that's progressive for everyone, not only specific people. So, how has the pandemic impacted you?
Well, so I am a Mellon undergraduate curatorial fellow at the High, as you know, and a part of my fellowship practice includes a full-time appointment at the High during the summer. So I've been at the High part-time all throughout the academic year, and was really looking forward to being there full-time at my cute little cubicle this summer, and really getting ready to dig into some awesome projects. But of course, with the pandemic, that was derailed, and so all of the work that I ended up needing to do just shifted to being virtual. And
Mm-hmm.
this was also sort of impacting other research projects that I had outside of my fellowship. So one of them being an amazing opportunity to participate in the Women in Migrations convening that was hosted by the NYU School and Dr. Deborah Willis and also Dr. Cheryl Finley. And so a large part of the work that I wanted to do included having access to the archives, but the archives are all closed. Yes. And so it pushed me to think about and to honestly develop this new means of researching and of creating scholarship. And so I was talking to a really great mentor of mine, and she helped me articulate what it is that I'm doing. And it's sort of operating as an artist researcher. And I'm using archival images and also my own photographs to create these digital double exposures that speak to what was, that speak to a very real and tangible past, but also that speaks to what's present, and that's sort of having this conversation around the sites of memory and truth, and the power of imagination and connection, and inserting a personal narrative into something that has historically not been personal at all, and sort of challenging the really normative and I'll just stop at normative, the really normative ways that we conduct art history and our historical research. And so that was one of the really wonderful, positive sort of side effects of COVID-19. And what else has it done? It's also sort of pushed me towards, it's done a lot, but it's also pushed me towards, it's also sort of completely reshaped our senior year. And so now we're in the face of writing thesis papers remotely, and that's going to be an interesting task. We're also, still going to be full-time students in class and still trying to do that and building a community, but also doing all of the things that are required of us as fourth-year students. And so that's been something. Have you thought at all about that? I was thinking about how we're going to do all these ceremonies remotely, because Spelman is a very historically entrenched in traditional school. And so a large part of that is this wonderful tradition of so many things. There's all these really amazing traditions. So, how has senior year sort of reshaped your senior year?
I've definitely been in my moments of sadness about not being able to return to campus, but you have to accept the things that you can't change and understand the ways to make it fun and possibly change your perspective, because I've changed my perspective. Like, okay, Tennille, you can't go back to campus, but you can still find a way to interact with your friends, prepare for a senior year and post-graduation. So something that's helped keep me grounded is preparation for post-graduation. So for me, that's meant researching different graduate programs, fellowships, or post-bac programs, because a huge part of me wanted to go back abroad. But now that, there's been many sanctions about who's to travel in and out of the United States, I've understood that maybe it's time for me to focus on my own passion projects. And I think you mentioned how the transition into being an art historian and focusing more onto my own art practice has helped me get back more into my creative side, as well as present my ideas in ways that I sort of moved from or became less focused on. So focusing back on photography for me and just working on different things with my brother has been helpful during the pandemic. And just speaking about being more honest with myself about what I would like to be a part of. So being that I'm in Harlem, a huge transition for me has been the adulthood aspect in Harlem and all of the things that I kind of wasn't aware of as a child in Harlem, and seeing seeing my block change. So for me, I definitely think that reassessing how we plan for senior year, because who's to say if we even get to go back in the spring?
Right.
So we already know how that's going to go. And with the ceremonies, we need a graduation. We need all of it.
Yes.
But the pandemic isn't over yet. So I definitely think that emotions and feelings surrounding, oh, what we can do and all of the ceremonies and just being able to interact in the same ways that we were,
Mm-hmm.
there won't be the same. And I think that we have to change our perspective as well.
Right. Well, that sort of brings into a question that was posed actually, but I think we both ought to answer because it reminds me. So I know we've been taking tons of classes together, and one of the most important classes I think was mining the museum.
Yes.
And it was in that class that we learned about Harlem on My Mind, this this major exhibition that completely reshaped the way that I think you and I both thought about art history and about museums.
Yes.
And so the question is, oh, and if anyone else has a question, please feel free to use the question function. The question is, are there any classes that have shaped your direction in art history or your career aspirations? And so I think perhaps that is a class that definitely did that for you.
Yes.
About that.
Okay, so I'll take that question. Definitely, mining in the museum completely shifted my perspective of how the museum infrastructure works. So this class was taught by Dr. Bernita Dr. Webbender.
Yes.
And Dr. Webbender has been such a great and essential part of my time at Spelman in helping me understand how museums, specifically the Harlem on My Mind show, is pivotal to the human perspective and understanding the different stories that we all have to bring. And the 1969 exhibition sort of showed how the ways that the Black identity and the Black participation within museums is sort of always have been put as propaganda or served as a way to sustain a certain quota or just make it as though there's a false sense of participation. So for me, learning more about the curator, Alan Schoner, and how he sort of formulated that, I think there always needs to be the idea that you're not working for the community, but instead with the community.
Absolutely.
And that was a huge failure within that exhibition because he was working for and not with, despite stating that he reached out to different organizations and high schoolers within the Harlem community. And yeah, that was definitely a pivotal class, as well as a class that I took this past semester with Dr. Espert called Black Female Bodies Within like a Global Image. And just understanding, you wouldn't even think about all of the smaller intricacies that continue to shape how we view things in society. So that's just been very helpful for me as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really a testament to sort of this place of privilege that we have as Spelman students learning art history. I have friends that are studying art history all around the city of Atlanta, but also all around the country. And it's just so glaringly obvious that we have opportunities to really think about art history in this really beautiful way. And I think that's why art history programs at HBCUs and at any minority serving institution, honestly, are so important. And so I guess I'll also take a stab at answering this question because I just answered a similar one a few days ago. There's two for me. The first is African American art history, which is also taught by Dr. Bernita Webbender. And in that class, it just, my entire understanding of art and art history just was completely blown up. And so it starts in the colonial era. It's all based in the States. So it starts in the colonial era and goes all the way to contemporary art. And I was just absolutely astonished at just the length of African American art production in our country's history. It's not something that I'd ever thought about, but it just dawned on me that, of course, the same people who were literally building this country, we're also creating things, and whether it be for a utilitarian purpose or simply for an aesthetic one. So thinking about quilt making, thinking about woodworking and carpentry, and also thinking about metalworking, like who made the wrought iron fences that go in front of these massive homes, plantations, and mansions, right? It's the same people that are making everything else. And so that course really woke me up. It really did. It also introduced me to some of my favorite artists, those being Henry Osawa Tanner and Edmoni Lewis. I love them, and I talk about them all the time. And they're artists who are creating work in the earlier part of our country's history. Edmoni Lewis, I want to say like they're early to mid 19th century, and then Henry Tanner kind of at the end of that century and at the beginning of the 20th century. But yeah, so learning about them was wonderful. And then this past semester, actually, I took a course with Dr. Cheryl Finley of Slavery and Visual Culture, and in that course, we got to meet so many great people. One of them being Jessica Ingram, and I am just absolutely fascinated by her, by the process that she used in a recent book that she published called A Road Through Midnight. And she's also gathering oral histories, gathering archival information, and photographs that she takes herself, and she goes essentially to visit sites of heinous violence against Black people in the American South. And that process, it inherently informs the process that I'm exploring now. And so being able to see that and being able to talk with her about her creative process was so important. But also I think the entire the entire course, all the information that we were inhaling, all the things that we were learning about, it just really showed how embedded slavery is in America's visual culture. And it's just mind-blowing, honestly, and it was really wonderful. And I think the final project that we worked on, it was an exhibition proposal, and I thought about my proposal sort of centered around monuments and remaking monuments, and that's something that is so incredibly timely now, as there's all of these conversations about tearing down Confederate monuments, and also conversations about mural building, and it was just wonderful, and it really helped me understand what I wanted to think about for my art history thesis, what I wanted to think about even for next steps, perhaps for a PhD dissertation or the book, or just in general. So those courses are extremely helpful to me.
And I think to your point about monuments and who we value as an American culture has completely shifted, especially within the uprisings that have occurred in response to the unfortunate killing of George Floyd, and how this also ties into the recent diversity and equity issues within the museums as well. So we've seen a bunch of statements released from the San Francisco Museum, as well as the MoMA and the Met. And I think that the one thing that's missing is the acknowledgement of how they've actually been a detriment to the missing narratives within the museum.
Right.
So.
That's this hot topic right now in the art world, especially with sort of I won't call them whistleblowers, but with these Instagram pages and collectives that are really allowing people to air out all of their grievances against institutions from the safety of anonymity, of being anonymous. And it's just been so incredibly interesting to follow them, to see what experiences I've also had that some of these folks have, whether it's really overt racial profiling or just racist experiences or microaggressions as a worker, as an employee. And it's been really powerful to see that and to track it. And I think having this information so readily available and so public facing is really forcing the museums to consider what they're doing and what they're not doing, of course. But it's also giving the public a new understanding of the museum space. And that's what we're realizing is that museums are sort of kept out of the wave of the civil rights movement, the first civil rights movement in the 60s, because they were seen as these separate liberal institutions that were inherently good. But we're seeing with these call-outs, and as we've seen historically with the exclusion of people of color,
opposite,
and anyone really who is not a part of like this heteronormative and homogenous body, like all of this exclusion that's happening, we're seeing that museums are in fact also white supremacist, and that's something that I'm really glad is being explored. And I feel like this moment is really turning the mirror onto museums, and it's giving the public, again, an understanding of how museums are also implicitly a part of this larger structure that is sort of plaguing our country. So
yeah,
I'm glad that we're having these conversations and that people are getting to speak their truths, and that they're not being silenced by the institutions as they have been historically.
And I think, to your point of how museums have always operated in a form of white supremacy, also speaks to the foundation and origins of curation. So when we look back at that, often the role of the curator has been of someone who has had a sort of financial background that allows them to work for free and create these stories and operate within these institutions as a way to present themselves as a prominent role or affluent person who is well aware of the certain colonial origins, as Dr. Finley just mentioned. And within understanding how the different roles, whether you be a part of the registrar in the museum or even within the education and the engagement roles in the museum, which are so essential, and how that sense of exposure and awareness within art has also helped me just connect certain dots with the way that we view how we can be a part of the museum itself, because I feel like not many Black people or people of color feel as though they can safely be a part and just be present within the museum itself. So
yeah, we definitely see that with folks leaving museums. And so I guess this question also, that there's another one that we have to answer. So what would we change if we were able to tear all of the museums down, saving the art though, but tear all the museums down and rebuild them? What would that look like? How could museums function in a more equitable future? What are your thoughts?
I definitely think that equity all starts from access, exposure, and opportunity. So firstly, I think that a change has to come from understanding that everyone has value and no one is to be treated expendable or inferior than another. So I think as for museums, that shift has to come with the collection. So who are we acquiring? What types of artists are we acquiring? And are they all from the same background? And what is the work speaking to the overall mission of the museum? So that's definitely how I think the start of the change should come from.
If I could start all the museums over again, I'd make everything free. All of them. All the museums are free. Anyone can come. Because I think that the financial barrier to entry, I think, is one of the most profound.
Yeah.
I'd also, and I've seen this in action at a few museums, I'd also consider reforming the way that we think about security within museums, and whether or not it's entirely necessary. And if it is necessary, thinking about security guards in a different way. And so I've seen some museums, I think the Museum of Contemporary Art in Cleveland, they have folks in the galleries who are stationed there, and they essentially act as like protection for the works, but really they're more like docents. And so they're people who are knowledgeable about the work, who are not in these uniforms. They're in plainclothes with a badge on, so you know that they work there. They're very easily identifiable as employees of the museum, but as opposed to like this really standoffish and hulking figure that's wearing this uniform that is very police-like, and that is which has a whole other layer to it. But as opposed
Yeah.
to doing that, it just creates, I think, an instantaneous ambiance of welcome. I think museums have a problem with being welcoming, and that there are many people that I know, family members of mine, that have never walked into a museum because they don't feel like it's somewhere that they're allowed to be. And that could be because of like the physical space, the way that it looks, the people who are most commonly seen going into those places, and of course, as I mentioned, the financial barriers too. So those are two major things that I think that I would change, and maybe also considering. I don't know. I think about the Baltimore Museum as sort of this shining example of like radical change in museums, but the way that they're collecting, the way that they've
done a great job.
Yeah, they're actively deaccessioning very valuable but not impactful artworks from their collection from these blue chip artists in order to support and collect artists who are disenfranchised historically, but who are also making powerful work that really speaks to people, you know, in a different way. And it allows them to think about and to use their collection more effectively. So they don't just have these works sitting in their collection storage for years on end, never being seen anymore. They're buying works that are going to be seen. And I think that is also so incredibly important.
And I also think that leaning more to more progressive setting of a museum, there should be more of a aspect where the community is involved within certain shows. So I think that would be a very interesting and new form of seeing how we can all collectively curate a show together and what that means for us to exhibit it. So I think that will also be an interesting aspect.
Absolutely.
And to your point of the radical change that has occurred at the Baltimore Museum, that notion of provenance. So who is to deem what's popular and who is to deem what is to be valuable? And especially for Black artists, we see it as though, unfortunately, not many artists have got to bask and live in their popularity while they're alive.
Right.
So how do you think that these changes and shifts will give more opportunity for Black artists to be celebrated while living and just have different opportunities?
That's a good question. I think that there are cycles, of course, of acceptance, cycles of institutional support. Seems to be every 20 to 30 years. But I think that there's a chance now in this moment to break that, and that the work is actually happening with us and with people like us. So there are all of these programs being funded by various foundations, the Mellon Foundation, the Ford Foundation, et cetera, the Walton Family Foundation, that are actively trying to build a pipeline, I guess, or build this gathering of arts professionals, of art historians, of archivists, of librarians, etc., of gallerists that are coming from just these amazing, wonderful backgrounds and coming from various institutions. And so I think that by starting with the people who would ideally be in the positions to make these institutional changes, so the people who are going to be feature curators and collections managers and directors of museums, by supporting those programs, I think that's one of the main ways that change is happening, and that change will hopefully happen. But there is the issue of this cohort and this group of young people that are our age and that are maybe 5 years ahead of us, that are being disillusioned by museums and by museum work because of the current state of museums. And so I think it's going to be a very it's going to require, I think, all of the things that are being done, but also larger institutional structural change, because without it, it's really going to, I think, prevent folks from being able to enter into positions. And so whether or not that's foundations endowing entry-level or junior-level curatorial positions at museums that actually give folks an opportunity to work as curators once they graduate from their PhD programs or their master's programs, that I think is really something that's been very important to me lately. If you're preparing us to enter into this field, but there are no job opportunities outside of a that are outside of a fellowship or something like that, how is it actually going to be any change? Especially when we know that curators often keep positions for very long tenures of time. And so what can you do? There has to be something, I think, that's a next step outside of supporting the education of people like us and of this next generation of people of color who will come into this field. You have to give us jobs, and you have to pay us well and pay us living wages as well, so that we're able to sustain ourselves and to do the real work, because there's only so much that we can do as students. There's only so much that we can do as temporary fellows at an institution. There's only so much that we can do. So those are some of the things that I've been really thinking about lately.
And I think all of those points are excellent and very poignant to where we stand now. So we've spoke about this, but how do these internships shift into leading us into roles that actually change the infrastructure? And once we get in these roles, are we then put in positions that we are not allowed to speak, or we're not allowed to actually contribute to the actual things that are going on within the community? So I think that's also another way that we can offer different jobs and how we are valuing these jobs. And another element for Black and people of color who are interested within the art world is make sure that the roles that you're interested or taking are not only hiring you or seeing you as a quota because of the need to remain politically sound and societally correct. So make sure that you are valuing your work, what you can contribute, and how you contribute that in a manner where you're not here for a season, but for a long time. And
that's also something I've been thinking about, whether or not quotas would be to our advantage, like in a way. If institutions had some type of clause to where they had to hire, or that a certain percentage of their intellectual staff or the staff that's creating shows, etc., be by POC. I wonder if that would be helpful, if that would actually force things to change and to grow. But so I guess this also leads into this larger conversation about allyship in the art world. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on institutions or individuals, if you feel comfortable naming them, or even collectives, or et cetera, that are sort of operating in this space of being an ally?
I definitely think that allyship is a great way to see the changes that will be essential to the overall growth, as well as shared understanding of how by POC people can be of necessity within these institutions. So one thing that I don't like within the allyship is the sort of like there's a step back from taking the ownership of the issues that have been made. So that's the first step that I think needs to occur, is taking ownership of the issues and how you've been a part of the problem itself. So acknowledging that. But also there have been many great organizations. I know the Rockefeller Foundation has been great within offering opportunities, as well as, well, you've been able to participate in that as well. The Crystal Bridges Partnership. And for me, the Art Institute has been great because this was an organization founded by Agnes Gund, and she has a great collection. And just speaking with her and seeing how she's just so involved in the necessary change that has to occur, and there needs to be more people who are willing to join us and not only step in and out of the struggle of trying to create that change. So
I've noticed that there are some institutions that are leaning towards allyship training as opposed to anti-racism training.
Yes.
Which I don't necessarily agree with. I think that it kind of silos a part of the museum staff, and that it kind of misses the larger point, like this larger need to address racism and the way that it operates. Yes. And inherently, I think as a participant in something like that, that you would learn how to be a better ally. But when I think about sort of the best allies that I've encountered, they've always been like individuals. They've been people who are willing to very boldly assert the rights that I have in a space when I'm afraid to do so. So if I'm in a meeting and I'm meant to be in this meeting contributing something, or if I'm unsure if I'm able to do that because of my position there, this person will step up and be very active in asking me to contribute, asking me my thoughts, telling me things that I wouldn't have learned otherwise, and giving me opportunities to sort of explore the institutions that I've been at as an intern, but also to comment, you know. And I think that that's so incredibly powerful and important, and that there are several institutions and foundations that have shown their ability to put their money where their mouth is and to support the efforts of the AEC Art Collective and also larger national efforts. Crystal Bridges always jumps out as one, but I have a really wonderful and fantastic relationship with that institution because that's the first place that I ever interned. So being there and being in a space like that where you have these Black women who are curators, Lauren Haynes, and also, oh my gosh, Allison Glenn, excuse me, and being able to see them and work with them, that was so incredibly empowering. But also thinking about the director in his position as the director of the museum, but also the chief diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. That's so powerful, I think. And if it's just, even if it's just a symbol, it's a very powerful one. But there's also actual work being done by the institution as well. So that sort of makes something beautiful.
And I think that, to your point about allyship, I think allyship for me more aligns with consistency as well as not letting my presence get overshadowed. And sort of speaking to the intersections of where I may come from or the kind of quality work that I can bring within my different areas of knowledge, and how that's also unprecedented within formulating new projects and leading toward this new wave of innovation that just tries new things. So whether these programs of participation also align with just completely new ideas. So do we have any more questions?
There are a couple. One of them is, how do you envision your role in the art world? And there's also a request for us to talk about our thesis projects. Oh, and there's a new one.
Okay.
Here, I'll post that one. Okay. Oh, and I will read it. Can I read it?
How can I, as an art teacher, this is one of my middle school art teachers. How can I, as an art teacher, teach my students how to learn about being a docent?
But to expose them to diverse works of museums to view online in the, I'm gonna guess the end is in the pandemic. So would you like to answer that? Because I have a great.
I think the first step would, definitely to expose them to works that they may be interested in, and sort of helping them understand how art is an essential tool for learning as well. But could you? I didn't see the second part of the question.
Oh, it's like you can't see it on the screen. It's a different one, but it's but to expose them to diverse works or museums to view online and I'm gonna guess that the end of is in the pandemic. Do you mind? I'm sorry, but posting the end of your question in the whatchamacallit on the thing. Yeah. But okay. But were you gonna continue?
Oh, yes. And just, there have been so many resources. So I can also share with you the resources that have, in the list that have been made for student participation in the different conferences that have been going on surrounding um, participation within museums, as well as, I think, not looking too far. So there are many forms of docent docentship, I'm not sure if that's a word, but many forms of being a docent within the community. So you can be a sort of historian within your community. I think that would be a great first step. So how students can learn more about the artists in which they've lived in, and how these artists have sort of helped propel the image and shift the image of the community. So
Okay. I'm so grateful that you asked this question because my art teachers have been super sort of formative in my pursuit of art history as a major, but also as a career. So I think that one of the most helpful things that I can think of virtually, there are tons of Instagram pages and
yeah.
blogs that are dedicated to highlighting artists of color or artists that are like marginalized historically. And so I think one of them, this is a shameless plug, is at the.curators.pic.
Yes.
And it is it's a platform that that a good colleague of mine has created and that I'm supporting in its creation. And it's essentially this place for young curators of color to congregate and for us to share selections, which are sort of like mini virtual exhibitions. And so as a result of that, because we're all interested in diverse art histories, the work that we're presenting is diverse. And so it's diverse in medium, it's also diverse in content, in subject matter, in the artists themselves as people. So I would highly suggest that perhaps as a resource. I think also Google Arts is a good one, and that there are several museums with very profound like virtual collections. I think the Cleveland Museum of Art has a really great virtual collection. And and I'll place the in the chat for you all. The Cleveland Museum of Art has a really phenomenal virtual collection, as does several museums in the in New York. So the Met, I think of automatically, and so there's also I know that the Metropolitan Museum of Art has programming that they post on YouTube that's been really interesting. And there's also the Art Assignment, which is a really amazing resource that I love. And it's a PBS program that also exists on YouTube that presents these really interesting takes on art history. So I would highly suggest those things. I know that was a lot at once, and so I'm so sorry if you didn't catch anything.
We'll make a list and then we'll share it.
Yeah.
So that'll be better.
Yes. So Tennille, we're entering into our last 3 minutes.
Yes.
Is there anything that you want to say, and I guess if you don't have anything particular to say, I do have another question for you.
Mm-hmm. I think that moving forward, for anyone interested within art history or within art itself, is that there are so many different backgrounds that should be acknowledged and to allow participation. So, and just remaining open to so much knowledge that is out there, because I've constantly grown as a student in just understanding how this practice can be essential to various parts of how we all can communicate. So that's something I would say.
That's wonderful. What do I have to say? I am so incredibly grateful for all of the people that have supported me, but also that have supported Tennille. The list is very exhaustive.
Yes.
And I think I wish I could name all of you, but I will also be forever grateful by the example that the staff at the Spelman Museum have shown. They're almost all of them are Spelman alumna, save for one. And it's so incredible to be able to see them and to be able to speak with them. And they've been really amazing at supporting me personally. Oh, there's one last question.
There's a question. How are you using this current social justice movement to motivate you as an artist/curator? You can go first.
Okay, I'm demanding more of the institutions that want to be a part of the work that I'm doing. I'm also demanding more of myself. I'm trying to be more thoughtful and critical about this present moment and the ways that my work can not memorialize, the ways that my work can memorialize and save this moment so that people in the future can understand it in the way that I'm experiencing it. What about you, Tennille? We have 16 seconds left.
Yes, I would agree that in this moment, I'm thinking more about how I can contribute to the archive as